The alarm drilled through the dark like a stuck siren, high and relentless, bouncing off every beige wall in Willow Creek Estates. Red emergency lights snapped on inside the clubhouse, flashing through the windows in slow pulses. The smell hit harder now, burnt insulation and something metallic, like overheated copper. Nobody talked. They just stared at the building like it might explain itself. Brenda turned toward me, not fully, just enough to break that perfect posture. "Do something," she said, low this time. Not a command. Not quite a request either. I did not move. The compliance officer shifted beside her, suddenly unsure where to stand. The pool water had gone still, pumps dead, surface flat like glass. That should not happen that fast. Somewhere behind the hedges, a relay clicked again. Then silence. Not quiet. The kind of silence that means something just stopped working completely. I took one step toward my truck. Brenda followed the movement with her eyes. She knew exactly what was inside it now. "You cannot leave that here overnight," she said, but the words came out thinner than before. I reached for the door handle. The metal was still warm from the sun. My reflection warped in the glass under that bright orange sticker. Cole Electrical Services buried underneath it. I peeled one corner back just enough to see the edge of my own lettering. The adhesive fought me. Of course it did. Everything about this place was surface first, logic later. Behind us, a woman knocked on the clubhouse door even though the lights were off. Another resident tried the keypad. It beeped once and died. No power to the access system. That meant no lock override, no emergency entry, nothing. I knew that panel. I had traced that wiring during a storm call last year. Half the circuits were patched into a temporary bus they never replaced. Cheap fix. Short lifespan. Brenda stepped closer. Too close for someone who had spent weeks pretending I did not belong on this street. "We have an event in there," she said. "Families. Equipment. Food. Refrigeration." Her voice kept listing things like inventory could solve electricity. I opened the truck door. The interior light came on. For half a second, then flickered and went out again. That was not my truck. That was the line feeding this whole block dropping below stable voltage. The system was sagging. Hard. I reached inside and grabbed my voltage tester. Small. Yellow. Worn smooth from years in my hand. The alarm cut off mid-wail. Just stopped. That was worse. When alarms die like that, it means they lost the power they are supposed to warn about. The red lights inside the clubhouse blinked twice more, then went dark. Complete blackout now. No backup. No fallback. The entire building just disappeared into shadow. A kid started crying somewhere near the pool. A car alarm went off down the street, triggered by the drop. Then another. A chain reaction of confused electronics. Brenda watched me lift the tester. Her eyes dropped to it, then back to my face. She finally saw it. Not the truck. Not the eyesore. The control. The one thing she had tried to find out of existence. "Ethan," she said, softer now. No title. No attitude. Just my name. The hedges crackled again, faint but real. Something in that cabinet was still alive, still pulling, still failing. I looked past her at the dark clubhouse, then at the silent road, then back at the sticker still clinging to my windshield. They had already made their decision about me. Now the system was making one about them. I slid the tester into my pocket and reached deeper into the truck for my insulated gloves, and that is when Brenda took one more step forward and blocked the door. Her hand hit the truck door before I could pull it open. Not hard. Just enough to stop it. The metal gave a dull thud under her palm. She was close now. Too close for someone who spent weeks pretending I was invisible. Wait, she said. One word. No polish. No smile. I looked at her hand on my door, then at her face. The streetlights flickered again behind her, weaker this time, like they were running out of breath. The air felt heavier. Warmer. That was not a good sign. Heat builds when systems strain. You cannot just leave, she added, but her voice did not carry the same authority anymore. I did not answer. I reached up and peeled the orange sticker the rest of the way off my windshield. It came away in one slow pull, tearing at the edges, leaving a sticky outline behind. The paper curled in my hand. $2,500 reduced to trash. I folded it once and set it on the dashboard. Behind us, someone tried a car door. It did not unlock. Electronic locks were failing now. Another small sign. Another piece of the same pattern. Brenda followed my eyes, then looked back at me. We need power back on, she said. This time it was clear. A request. I opened the truck door. It creaked slightly, familiar and steady. Inside, everything was where it should be. Meter. Gloves. Breakers. Tools lined in order. Control. I stepped around her, not touching, just moving through the space she thought she still owned. She turned with me. Ethan, there are people in there, she said. I nodded once. I already knew. I had counted them earlier when I drove past. 40, maybe 45. Kids. Seniors. Equipment pulling load it should never have been pulling. The compliance officer hovered a few feet away, holding his clipboard like it could protect him. Is this dangerous? He asked. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on the hedge line where that cabinet sat hidden. It is getting there, I said. The words landed flat. Honest. No drama. That made it worse. The hedges gave another soft crackle. Faint sparks flickered behind the leaves, tiny flashes like insects. The smell sharpened. Insulation breaking down. That cabinet was still live, still pulling current through something it should not. That meant the fault had not cleared. It was feeding itself. Brenda took a step back without realizing it. Her heel scraped against the pavement. That was the first instinct she trusted all night. Distance. Can you fix it? She asked. I pulled the insulated gloves from the seat and slid them on, one hand at a time. The rubber snapped lightly at my wrists. I flexed my fingers. Grounded. Focused. I can stop it from getting worse, I said. I let that sit for a second. Not everything needs to be explained. Not everything should be. A car alarm down the block cut off mid-sound. Dead silence followed. Systems were dropping one by one. The entire street was going dark in pieces. I reached back into the truck and grabbed my flashlight. The beam cut clean through the dim air, landing on the hedge line. The cabinet door rattled slightly, like something inside was shifting. That was new. That was wrong. Brenda saw it too. Her voice dropped even lower. What do you need? She asked. I turned the light off and looked at her. Really looked this time. Perfect hair. Perfect clothes. No control left. Room, I said. She did not move at first. Then she stepped aside. Just enough. I stepped forward toward the hedges, boots crunching on gravel, every sound sharper in the dark. Behind me, no one spoke. They were all watching now. Waiting. The cabinet gave one more sharp pop, louder than before, and I knew exactly what that meant. I pushed through the hedges and the branches scraped against my sleeves, dry leaves crackling in the dark. The cabinet sat crooked in the dirt, door vibrating slightly with each pulse from inside. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just wrong. I crouched and aimed the flashlight at the seam. The metal around the hinge was scorched, a thin black line running down like something had been bleeding heat for days. I had seen this before. Slow failure. Ignored warnings. Cheap fixes stacked on top of older cheap fixes. Behind me, gravel shifted as Brenda stepped closer, then stopped again. She knew better than to get too close now. "What is happening?" she asked. Her voice sounded smaller out here, away from the streetlights and her perfect sidewalks. I did not answer right away. I reached out with the back of my gloved hand and hovered near the cabinet door. Heat rolled off it. Not extreme, but steady. Building. That meant the load was still feeding through a compromised path. That meant this was not over. Not even close. The flashlight beam flickered across the latch. It was not secured properly. One screw missing. One bent. I had pointed that out in my last message to the HOA board. I remembered the reply. Noted. Nothing else. No action. No follow-up. Just a word to close a problem they did not understand. Inside the cabinet, something clicked again. Faster this time. A relay trying to compensate. Failing. Retrying. I exhaled slowly and set the flashlight on the ground, angling it up so the beam filled the inside edges when I opened the door. "Nobody touches this," I said over my shoulder. No one argued. I could feel them all behind me, a few feet back, held there by instinct more than instruction. I unlatched the door and pulled it open an inch. A thin line of light spilled across the components inside. Wires. Breakers. A temporary bus connection that had no business being permanent. The insulation on one of the feeder lines had darkened, the surface bubbled in places. That was the source. Heat damage. Resistance building. Current forcing its way through anyway. I opened the door wider. The cabinet gave a low hum that settled into my bones. The kind of sound that tells you the system is still alive, still dangerous, even when everything else has gone dark. I reached for my tester and held it near the damaged line. The reading spiked instantly. Too high for a partial shutdown. That meant something upstream was still pushing load into this section. Something had not tripped when it should have. That was the real problem. Not just the cabinet. The protection had failed. I straightened slightly and glanced back at Brenda. Her eyes were locked on the open panel. She was finally seeing what her decisions had been covering up. "You shut off the last maintenance contract, did you not?" I asked. She hesitated. Just long enough to answer without words. The compliance officer shifted again, his clipboard hanging useless at his side. "We reallocated funds," he said. I nodded once. Of course they did. Landscaping over infrastructure. Paint over wiring. Appearances over function. It always ended the same way. The cabinet popped again, sharper now, a small flash snapping across the damaged line. Not large. But enough. Enough to tell me the insulation was about to give up completely. Enough to tell me this could jump circuits if it kept going. I reached into my truck behind me without turning and pulled out a breaker clamp. The metal felt cold and certain in my hand. This was the point where small problems stopped being small. This was the point where someone either knew what they were doing or everything got worse. I stepped closer to the cabinet, adjusting my stance, measuring distance, watching the rhythm of the failing line. Behind me, no one spoke. Even the night felt like it was holding its breath. I lifted the clamp, lined it up with the feeder, and paused for half a second as the hum shifted in pitch, because that change told me something new had just entered the system. The pitch shifted just enough to make my grip tighten. That was not random noise. That was load coming back online somewhere it should not. I froze the clamp mid-air and listened. The hum inside the cabinet deepened, uneven now, like two currents fighting each other. That meant a secondary feed was still active. Somewhere upstream, something had bypassed the cutoff. I pulled the clamp back slowly and angled the flashlight deeper into the panel. The beam caught a second line tucked behind the main feeder. Not original. Not clean. A patch job. Someone had tied in an auxiliary line without upgrading the protection. I had seen this kind of shortcut before. It works until it does not. Who authorized additional load on this panel? I asked, still looking inside. Silence behind me. Then the compliance officer cleared his throat. We added temporary lines for the event, he said. Temporary. The word hung there like it explained anything. I traced the extra line with the light. It ran out of the cabinet, under the hedge, toward the clubhouse. Extension-grade cable feeding a permanent structure. That alone was enough to overload the system. But the real problem was how it was connected. No proper breaker. No isolation. Just tied in. Forcing current through a path that was already failing. The cabinet clicked again, faster now. The damaged insulation pulsed faintly, heat building in waves. I reached in with the tester again and checked both lines. The main feeder was unstable. The auxiliary line was worse. Spiking, dropping, spiking again. That rhythm meant the load inside the clubhouse was cycling. Refrigeration units trying to restart. Air conditioning kicking and failing. Each attempt pushing more stress back through the panel. Turn everything off. Inside, I said without looking back. Now. Brenda did not answer right away. I could feel her hesitation. Not from doubt. From habit. Control does not let go easily. Another sharp pop snapped inside the cabinet. A small flash jumped across the damaged section. Not large, but closer than before. Do it, I said, louder this time. Footsteps broke the stillness. Someone ran toward the clubhouse. The door handle rattled again. No power. No access. It will not open, a voice called out. Of course it would not. The keypad system was dead. I stepped back from the cabinet and turned slightly. There is a manual override on the side panel, I said. Small metal box. Knee height. A pause. Then scrambling. Hands against metal. A click. The door opened with a dull thud. Movement inside. Voices. Confusion. Good. That meant they could start shutting things down. I turned back to the cabinet. The hum dropped slightly. Not fixed. Just less strained. The auxiliary line flickered again under the flashlight beam. I could cut it. That would isolate the bad feed and relieve the pressure on the main line. But doing it fast, without coordination, could cause a surge back through the system. Timing mattered now. Sequence mattered. I slid the clamp back into position, this time aligning it with the auxiliary line instead of the main feeder. Behind me, Brenda stepped closer again. Not in the way. Just near enough to watch. If you shut that off, do we get power back? She asked. I shook my head once. You get control back, I said. That was the difference. Power was not just on or off. It was managed. Balanced. Protected. Something this system had not been in a long time. Inside the clubhouse, I heard someone shouting instructions. Switches flipping. Equipment shutting down. One by one. The load on the auxiliary line dipped. The hum in the cabinet steadied for half a second. That was my window. I tightened my grip on the clamp and leaned in, watching the rhythm, waiting for the exact moment the system exhaled, because if I missed it by even a second, this whole panel would answer back. I felt the load dip for half a second, like the system took a breath it had been holding too long. And that was my moment. I drove the clamp onto the auxiliary line and locked it in place. The metal clicked shut. The hum inside the cabinet snapped sharp, then dropped. Not silent. Just cleaner. The flicker in the damaged insulation faded to a dull glow instead of that erratic pulse. Behind me, someone inside the clubhouse shouted that the refrigerators were off. Another voice said the air conditioning units had stopped trying to restart. Good. That reduced the cycling. That reduced the stress. I kept my eyes on the main feeder. It was still carrying load, but now it was not fighting a second line. The rhythm smoothed out. Still unstable, but predictable. Predictable was something I could work with. I reached in with the tester again. The reading dropped from chaotic spikes to a steady, elevated level. Too high for comfort, but no longer climbing. That meant I had bought time. Not a fix. Time. The cabinet let out one last soft click, then settled into a low hum that felt almost normal compared to what it had been. I exhaled slowly and stepped back half a pace. My boots shifted on the gravel. The night air felt cooler now that the immediate heat was not pushing out of the panel. Brenda moved closer again, careful this time, stopping just behind my shoulder. "Is it over?" she asked. I shook my head. "It is contained," I said. The word mattered. Contained meant it could still break if pushed. Contained meant there was still something wrong upstream. I looked back at the main feeder. The insulation damage was still there. Dark. Weakened. One more heavy surge and it would fail completely. "Do not turn anything back on yet," I called toward the clubhouse. My voice carried through the open door. Someone inside answered, "Everything is off." I nodded once. Good. That gave me a stable baseline. I crouched again and studied the panel. The temporary bus connection caught my eye. It was overloaded, carrying more than it had been designed for. That was why the protection had not tripped correctly. It had been bypassed in practice, even if not on paper. Someone had built a system that looked right from the outside and failed where it mattered. I reached into the truck again. And pulled out a small replacement breaker. Not ideal. Not permanent. But enough to reroute the load safely if I installed it right. Brenda watched every movement now. No interruptions. No comments. Just watching. That was new. The compliance officer stood further back, no longer pretending to be in charge of anything. I slid the breaker into position and tested the fit without engaging it. The panel vibrated lightly under my hand. Still alive. Still dangerous if handled wrong. I adjusted the angle, making sure the contact points would seat clean. No sparks. No hesitation. Clean work only. I paused again and listened. The hum held steady. No new clicks. No hidden surges. This was the window. I pressed the breaker into place and locked it down. The sound was small. Controlled. The kind of sound you only notice if you know what it means. Inside the clubhouse, a single light flickered on. Then off again. Testing. Someone had tried a switch. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, tracking the response. The system held. No spike. No surge. That meant the load path was stabilizing. Not fixed. Stabilizing. I stood up slowly and pulled my gloves off one finger at a time. The rubber snapped softly in the quiet. Brenda stepped forward again, closer than before, her voice almost careful now. "Can we bring it back?" she asked. I looked at the panel, then at the dark street beyond, then back at her. There was still one piece missing. One part of this system I had not touched yet. And if that part failed when everything came back online, this whole neighborhood would learn what a real outage felt like. I shook my head once. Not yet. The panel behind the hedges was only half the story. The real problem sat upstream, hidden where nobody ever looked because it was not visible from the street. I pointed past the clubhouse, toward the service alley behind the row of mailboxes. "There is a secondary junction box back there," I said. "If that one did not trip when this failed, bringing power back will push everything right back into overload." Brenda followed my finger, eyes narrowing like she was seeing that part of her neighborhood for the first time. The compliance officer shifted again. "That is just a backup line," he said. I did not look at him. "Nothing about this system is backup anymore," I said. The word hung there. Real. Heavy. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking. Gravel crunched under my boots. The night air had cooled, but there was still a faint heat in the ground, like the system had soaked into it. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Not close. Just enough to keep up. Brenda. Of course. We rounded the side of the clubhouse. The decorative lights along the path were dead, leaving only the thin beam from my flashlight cutting through the dark. The mailboxes stood in a neat row, untouched, perfect, useless without power. Behind them, the service alley opened up. Narrow. Unlit. Ignored. That was where the real work always lived. I aimed the light down the wall until it landed on a smaller metal box, mounted low, half hidden behind a trash enclosure. The paint was chipped. The label had peeled. No landscaping here to make it look nice. I stepped closer and crouched. The air felt different here. Still. No breeze. Just that quiet pressure that builds around equipment under strain. I pressed the back of my hand near the surface. Warm. Not as bad as the main cabinet, but warmer than it should be. That confirmed it. The failure had traveled. I glanced back at Brenda. She stood at the edge of the light, arms crossed now, not out of authority but out of tension. "This feeds the whole row," I said. "Clubhouse, pool, half the street." She swallowed slightly. I could hear it in the quiet. "And it is still live?" she asked. I nodded once. I reached for the latch and paused. Listening. No hum this time. That was worse. Silence in a live line can mean the system is waiting. Holding. Ready to surge when demand returns. I opened the box slowly. The hinge creaked, louder than it should have in the still air. Inside, the wiring was cleaner than the main cabinet, but not untouched. A second modification. Newer. Brighter insulation tied into older lines. Someone had tried to fix the earlier problem without addressing the source. That was how systems failed in layers. I brought the tester up and checked the feed. The reading held steady. For a second, then jumped. Not a spike. A delayed reaction. That meant stored load somewhere in the line. Capacitors or compressors ready to kick the moment power stabilized. If we turned everything back on at once, this box would take the hit before the main panel could react. And this one did not have the capacity to absorb it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a second clamp. Smaller. Precision tool. Not something most people would even recognize. Brenda watched it like it was the answer to everything. It was not. It was just another step. When I say, you turn things back on one circuit at a time, I said. She nodded quickly. No hesitation now. Good. I positioned the clamp near the incoming line, measuring distance, tracking the slight fluctuation in the reading. The system was breathing again, shallow and uneven. I needed to guide that breath, not shock it. Behind me, the clubhouse door creaked open again. Voices. Waiting. Ready. I adjusted my grip and leaned closer to the panel, because if I got this sequence wrong, the entire load would slam into this box at once. I held the clamp steady and watched the meter settle into a shallow rhythm, not stable but no longer chaotic. That was enough to begin. Start with the smallest load, I said without turning. My voice carried down the alley and into the open clubhouse door. A pause. Then a faint click from inside. One circuit. The reading in my hand lifted slightly, then held. Good. No surge. The line accepted it. I adjusted my grip by a fraction, keeping the clamp aligned with the incoming feed, guiding the current instead of forcing it. Another click from inside. Lights tried to come back, flickered once, then stayed dim but alive. The system exhaled again, longer this time. Brenda stepped closer behind me, close enough that I could hear her breathing change. Slower now. Controlled. She was learning the rhythm without understanding the language. Keep going, I called. A third switch flipped. This time the reading jumped higher, then dipped. Not dangerous yet, but close enough to matter. I shifted the clamp slightly, easing the load across the line, letting it distribute instead of spike. The hum inside. The box returned, soft but present. That was good. Silence meant failure. Sound meant flow. Inside the clubhouse, voices dropped. People realized something was working. Hope does that. It quiets rooms. Another circuit came online. This one heavier. I felt it before I saw it. A pull through the line, subtle but real. I leaned in and watched the meter. The number climbed, paused, then steadied again. Still within range. Barely. I nodded once, even though they could not see me. One more, I said. A hesitation this time. Someone inside understood the risk. Then the switch flipped. The reading spiked higher than before, the highest it had been since I took control of the line. For a split second, the system resisted. The wires inside the box gave a faint tick, like metal adjusting under pressure. I tightened my grip, holding the clamp exactly where it needed to be. Not a fraction off. Not a second late. The spike hovered, then slowly dropped. The system accepted the load. The line held. I exhaled. Not relief. Just confirmation. Behind me, Brenda let out a breath she had been holding too long. Lights are on, someone called from inside. I did not turn. Lights meant nothing if the structure behind them was still weak. I watched the meter for another few seconds. No delayed surge. No hidden spike. Just a steady draw, slightly elevated but controlled. That meant the second box had taken the load properly. That meant the main feeder would not get slammed when everything came back online. I eased the clamp back, slowly, letting the line carry itself again. The hum remained. Stable now. Predictable. That was the goal. I closed the box and secured the latch, making sure it sat flush this time. No gaps. No shortcuts. I stood and looked back toward the clubhouse. Windows glowed again, soft yellow light spilling out onto the pavement. People moved inside, slower now, cautious, like they did not trust the lights yet. They should not. Not until everything was checked. Brenda stepped beside me, not in front, not blocking anything this time. Just standing there. Watching the building she thought she controlled come back to life because of the one thing she tried to push out. Is it done? She asked. I looked at the lit windows, then at the dark stretch of houses beyond, then back at the cabinet behind the hedges we had left open earlier. Not yet, I said. Because bringing power back was one thing. Making sure it did not fail again was something else entirely, and there was still one part of this system that had not been tested under full load. I walked back toward the first cabinet without saying anything, the gravel louder now that the street had gone quiet again. Lights were on behind me, but they were cautious lights. No one trusted them yet. That was good. They were finally paying attention. The hedges brushed my sleeves again as I pushed through, and the open panel came back into view, still humming, still carrying the weight of everything we had just brought back online. The damaged feeder line looked worse under steady load. The darkened insulation had spread slightly, a faint widening along the surface. That told me everything I needed to know. It had not failed yet, but it would. Not tonight, maybe. But soon. I crouched again and checked the reading. Stable. Higher than before, but holding. That meant the system was balanced for now. For now was not enough. Brenda stepped in behind me, slower this time, like she understood this space belonged to something bigger than her. "What is left?" she asked. I did not look up. I pointed at the feeder line. "That," I said. One word. Clear. She leaned slightly to see it. "It is still working," she said. I nodded. "So is a cracked beam," I replied. The hum inside the cabinet shifted slightly as another appliance inside the clubhouse came online. The system adjusted, absorbed it, held. Barely. That was the edge we were standing on. I reached into my truck and pulled out a roll of temporary high-temperature wrap. Not a fix. Not even close. But enough to reinforce the weak point until it could be replaced properly. If it was replaced properly. I wrapped the damaged section slowly, each turn tight, precise, building a layer that could handle the heat for now. The material pressed against the warm insulation, sealing it, containing what it could not repair. Behind me, no one spoke. They watched. Not with curiosity anymore. With understanding. I finished the wrap and stepped back, checking the line again. The reading stayed steady. No new fluctuation. That would hold. For now. I stood and pulled my gloves off, one finger at a time, the rubber snapping softly in the night. Brenda shifted beside me. "So we are safe?" she asked. I looked at the cabinet, then at the lit clubhouse, then at the row of houses stretching into the distance. "You are stable," I said. The difference mattered. Safe meant nothing would go wrong. Stable meant it had not yet. She nodded slowly, like the words took a second to land. The compliance officer stepped closer, finally finding his voice again. "We will need documentation for this," he said. I looked at him, then at the clipboard in his hand, then back at the cabinet. Paperwork. After everything. I almost smiled. Almost. "You will need more than that," I said. I walked back to my truck, the peeled sticker still sitting on the dashboard, edges curled. I picked it up and pressed it flat against the glass for a second, right over my company name, then pulled it away again. The adhesive had lost its grip. It would not stick anymore. Not after what just happened. I dropped it into the trash bag behind the seat and closed the door. Brenda watched me, waiting. Not commanding. Not correcting. Waiting. "You shut down maintenance to save money," I said. "You patched systems you did not understand. You ignored warnings you did not like." Each sentence landed clean. No anger. Just facts. She did not interrupt. She did not argue. That told me more than anything else. I reached into the truck and pulled out a card. Plain. White. My number on it. I held it out. She hesitated for half a second, then took it. "Careful this time. Like it mattered." "Call me tomorrow," I said. "We do this right or it fails again." She looked at the card, then back at me, something different in her expression now. Not authority. Not pride. Something closer to understanding. I turned and glanced once more at the cabinet behind the hedges, the one they had hidden, the one that had almost taken everything down tonight, and I knew this was not the end of it.